Greetings, everyone. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to the Mortgage Innovators podcast, where we deliver fresh and hopefully fun and entertaining insights on all things mortgage and the innovation that's propelling our industry forward. My name is Margaret Chiavini. I am with New Res Correspondent Lending, and every Tuesday you can find our rotating group of co-hosts who all share their own unique connection to the industry. This week, we actually have a very, very wonderful episode for you. And we're going to continue on the theme of real ROI. So as you know, this month, our series is Real ROI, really trying to measure that. All our episodes are focused on technology and the return on investment. But before we get into this episode, I am excited to welcome two special guests that we have this week. So we have, first of all, Narayan. Narayan is from Indecomm. Welcome, Narayan.
Thanks, Margaret. Great to be here.
And of course, Greg from AmeriHome. Greg, we're super excited to have you giving us a lender perspective on this wonderful topic. Welcome.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here as well. Looking forward to it.
Super. Okay, so nothing seems more important these days than ROI. So this week's episode is called Measuring ROI for Real. And that's exactly what we're going to do for the next 15, 20 minutes is talking about that. We all know that the mortgage industry right now has been, well, let's really be honest, brutal for the last 6 months on everybody. Brokers, banks, independent mortgage bankers, and really everybody else are looking for ways to cut and save money, looking for ways to really be more efficient. Technology is needed. No matter what the executive teams are now asking, the real return on investment in their technology stack. That's like one of the hottest topics from the executive perspective. So today's episode is really all about how we can assess, how we can measure, and how we can continually be on top of our current technologies and new technologies to produce the ROI that we want to achieve in our organization. So having said that, gentlemen, where I'd like to begin is really when we say ROI, what do we mean? I think of everybody always says that return on investment, but it can be so many things to so many different people. Would you give us your perspective when you think of ROI? How do you think about it?
Yeah. So when we look at ROI, I typically look at it in 4 broad categories. Like you said, I remember an old story, a fable of 4 blind men feeling different parts of an elephant and then perceiving it to be very different, right? So ROI is kind of like that. Everybody has their own definition of what that is, depending on where their business is. But I like to think of it in 4 different categories, and that's the standard recommendation that I provide to our clients. One is, bottom line cost reduction, right? And that's the biggest piece that most lenders aim for. But cost reduction also is pretty heavy, right? How do you define a cost reduction? How can you directly attribute cost reduction as an ROI? For instance, if you're automating some tasks, are you seeing a linear reduction in cost of the number of people who were executing that task before, right? So is it measurable? Is it attributable to a direct function that you're doing? So one is cost reduction. And the second one is improving productivity. Are you putting more through the pipeline because of the automation or because of the technology that you've implemented in your mortgage bank, right? And directly attribute, you can take out other common costs, but is it directly attributable? And the third, very interesting thing that I noticed, in early 2010s, I was talking to a CEO, and we were talking about automating some of their processes. And he said to me that, listen, where I am, my cost per loan is fantastic, right? My productivity is great, but the market is down right now. So what I want to do is I want to build for scale for the future. So I'm not going to track ROI for today, but when the market picks up 2 years or 3 years down the line, I wouldn't have to add 4,000 people and get into a mad scramble. So I'll track my ROI at that time, right? So that's very forward looking. That's not something that you can track right away. But clearly, that's what I call building for a nonlinear scale in the business. Right? And then, of course, there are loan quality improvements. Loan quality improvement, again, is often seen as a very high level item, but you can directly track it to measurable metrics. Are you reducing your loan loss reserves? Are you getting less repurchases, right? Are you getting less defects from your investors? So these are direct measures that you can attribute to any of these. So, improvement in productivity, cost takedowns, which are directly measurable, building for future scale, and then direct improvement in loan quality. So I would say broadly, these are the ones, right? But in addition to that, there are some things that any lender has to do that are just table stakes. Compliance is an unavoidable spend. So, yeah, you can track your ROI with compliance, making sure that your compliance, penalties and fines are reduced, but that's table stakes. You have to spend that money. And, if you'd asked me 15 years ago about portals, I would say they were ubiquitous, right? But now every mortgage lender has to have an online presence. Does it translate into a direct-to-consumer volumes? Maybe, maybe not. But that's the price that you have to pay to be in the game. So there are certain things that are must-have that you don't directly measure ROI, but there are certain attributes that I'd measured, right, which typically lenders could track for driving up the ROI. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, I think all of those are spot on, Ryan, for sure. I guess the only thing that I would add, because at the end of the day, especially from a correspondent investor perspective, it's all about, turn times, productivity, or quality improvements, and you hit all of those. But in times like we're facing right now, your tech spend may not be directed at any of those. Maybe it's about, like we're doing, focusing on how do I enhance revenue. And so the way you enhance revenue now is gearing your product set to make sure that, and your technology, of course, has to support the product set. Are you implementing products that are in demand now? We're seeing a little bit more on the QM side. We're seeing more on the ARM side, some DSCR out, all of those type of things. Maybe it's better for you to put a new product out there rather than spending on cost reduction or quality, right? It just depends upon the problem that you're trying to solve. What's your biggest issue?
Yeah, I love that, what you both said. And to me, it always is important to anchor back to your point, Greg. What are you trying to accomplish? And Narayan, I love the fact that you had one of your four that is a little bit unconventional, which is measuring ROI for the future. I forget the name of the gentleman that was the hockey player, and everybody said, what makes you such a great hockey player? And he says, oh, well, because I don't worry about where the puck is. I go to where the puck is going to be. And when you said that, Narayan, you made me think of that, the forward
Gretzky,
looking.
by the way.
Yeah, it was Gretzky.
Thank you. And Greg, thank you for, I was really hoping that one of the things we were going to be able to talk about in this episode is thinking about ROI differently, because I love that. Right now, how do we enhance revenue? Everyone is in that boat. And so it may not be the traditional way that you would measure ROI, but as you say, can I release products that are going to enhance the revenue? And then does my tech stack support that? And so they become a partner and an important part of basically accomplishing the goals. Definitely. What are all of your thoughts on when you purchase technology, or when you're assessing technology? Do you feel like as an industry we can do a better job in making sure that the conversation of ROI is much earlier on in the whole cycle?
I would say, without question, but I would say before you even start to look at technology, you need to know what your internal measurements are, right? So again, we'll go back to, if you're trying to cut costs, well, you have to figure out what do you want to cut, and then how much does it cost you to perform that function, right? Easiest way to do that is ask the people that are doing it. If I could fix one thing for you, what would it be? They'll tell you, believe it or not, they know the answer. So that's what we've done successfully. And then when you go out to vendors in that instance, for example, you do your RFP, you talk to people, now you know your benchmark that you're trying to attain internally. One of the challenges that I've seen in working with vendors is oftentimes they'll price a product based upon what they need to make from it versus what the industry can bear. So when I go into those negotiations, I always try to say, hey, look, this is what it costs me. If I'm going to outsource it to you, you don't get all the savings. So you need to do it for this price. If you can do it, great, because I don't want to put you in a bad position. If you can't, no problem. I get it, right? So, that's where I would focus.
Yeah, so I think Greg is spot on. The other thing, especially making technology selection is, I've been in the banking tech business for 30 years, right? And we've seen so many hype cycles up and down. What I would say is be a smart, fast follower when it comes to new tech, right? Because there's a lot of marketing hype that precedes reality in the world today, especially with social media. There's just an explosion, right? People talk about blockchain, human NFTs, there's just a whole lot of stuff. But the thing that lenders need to really focus on is, what is that specifically going to do to me? For instance, when we talk about blockchain in an audit software, what's that really going to do to me? Blockchain is not even an ecosystem today, right? So do I really want to build it for 7 years down the line when blockchain may connect all of this? Or do I just go for a system that's relational database, albeit reasonably secure, right? So I think these are the questions, because what ends up happening is you end up doing two things. One is you're paying a premium for the purported, niche that you're getting into. And the second thing is the maintenance of that, because of the ubiquity of the technology, becomes that much more of a hassle. So I think, coming from a bank and then working now at a software firm, I can tell you that there's just a lot more that we get stumped with when I hear about things like this. So I think that's really critical. Always ask the question about, what's it going to do for our business? Do we really need that bell and whistle? Is it anywhere in our roadmap for the next 5 years? If blockchain is not there, if an NFT is not in play, then why pay the tech excess is what I would call, right? And people always talk about, there is a phrase called tech debt, where you accumulate bad code over time. But I think it's turned into a point where we start accumulating tech excess for stuff that we don't use today, and we end up paying a premium for that.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just kind of following on is, if the vendor, the service provider is not doing it for someone else who's in your situation, I would be cautious of that, right? Bleeding edge is not where you want to be. Fast follower, totally agree with that statement. And that's one way we would approach it.
I love that you guys are talking about being a fast follower. I've just got to give a plug for mortgageinnovators.com, because as you, I'm sure, know, it is literally like a digital library and repository for all of the technology that's really available. And Narayan and Greg, when you say be a fast follower, then you can literally go to a place and say, hey, what's happening out there? And somebody's doing it. And Greg, to your point, it's already working. Let me do that. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's great. I'd like to actually go into a topic that's a little bit more on the surface negative. However, I think it's very important that we talk about it. If you're in your organization, if you're looking at if you're trying to make an assessment, are there technologies or things that I need to cut in this environment? How do you think about that?
It's a great question right now, right? So cutting is always a challenge, because hopefully you implemented things for the right reason. But if you're sitting here and saying, I think it's a good opportunity to look at the services you do have, and are they providing a return to you, right? Are they a nice to have versus I got to have this? An example of that might be some customer facing technology that might automate, for example, I'm just picking one, and I'm not saying this is what I'm faced with, but if you're providing a service, does it really make any difference to your turn times or your profitability or your ability to close? If you turn that service off, would the client really even know that, for example? Maybe you could save money that way. But I think another way to do it would be to look at the contracts you have. Especially if you wrote new contracts over the last 2 years, you wrote them in a hyper market, as we all know, and maybe you have minimums that are higher than they should be, or the price you're paying just doesn't make any sense anymore, I think it's a really good time to step back. And if you truly have vendors that are business partners, you can have that conversation and explain to them, look, here's what I can afford to pay versus not, right? So I think that's a huge recommendation from our side.
I'm going to say, Greg, great point. I would just add on to that last point, right? We've seen so many cycles of mortgage, boom and bust and boom and bust. But the one thing that's constant is the cost model. Why is that always static, right? Why do you have to have a fixed cost model? And the only levers that we have are people, right, in order to reduce costs. So I would say that when it comes to software or technology, don't lock yourself into, solid license-based, hardware-heavy, maintenance-heavy software contracts, because your cost needs to move in line with your volumes. And if you haven't structured your contracts that way, when your volumes go down, you're stuck with that same level of cost of technology, heavy hardware intensive, heavy license intensive. So I think there's an opportunity to revisit. And a lot of the market has moved. A lot of the software has been repriced into that. So look for solutions. There are people who are willing to, give you a fantastic deal at a transaction-based pricing today, which is very much in line with where the market is. So I think that's another important perspective, rather than locking yourself into user-based licenses that you can't get rid of when you let go of the people. So you're stuck with that, hardware and software.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just say, and if they won't renegotiate with you, maybe it's time to shop around a bit. To Narayan's point, technology does move, costs do come down as more people use the same service. And assuming switching costs are reasonable, that's a very viable solution.
And I really like how you are talking about the technology companies as partners. That's so important. One of the co-hosts is Sue Woodard, and she talks about that a lot. She talks about how your technology partners need to be your partner, where you can go and you can say, I'm facing these challenges, and, can we renegotiate? Or Narayan, as you said, making sure that structurally when you begin, it's more variable in nature rather than, fixed, and is going to be really out of whack if the volume, cycles change. So that is really great. Wow. Well, gentlemen, I can see why you have the roles that you have, and appreciate so much your perspective on the whole topic of ROI. We're coming to the end of our episode. Are there any final parting words that you might have on this topic that would be good to share with our audience?
I would just say, we talked about some good things here, but things move fast. So I would say that, we do this on a regular basis anyways. It's a good thing to build into your processes normally. Look at what you're using and why you're using it. But of course, it's certainly more better time now to do it than ever.
It's a very sobering moment for the industry, and now is the time to really peel back the layers and see what we're doing right and what we're not doing wrong. Because now is the time when you really have that opportunity to introspect what you're doing. So it's unfortunate, but it's a great time to really look at what the industry is doing.
And Greg, I'll just go back to one of the things you said that really resonated for me, and that is know what you're trying to accomplish. Because if you can anchor to what you're trying to accomplish, it's much easier to make a good grounded assessment if the technology is going to support that. So thank you very much. Well, Narayan and Greg, thank you for joining us, and really appreciate this episode. And then to our wonderful audience, thank you for listening today. As always, if you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe to the Mortgage Innovators YouTube channel or wherever you podcast. So until next time.